When you picture Japan, what comes to mind? Majestic castles, their white walls and curved roofs rising against a backdrop of cherry blossoms? These iconic structures are symbols of a bygone era, the age of the samurai. But what if I told you that for every castle still standing today, hundreds were lost? In fact, Japan once boasted nearly 5,000 castles. Today, only a handful remain in their original form. So, what happened? Where did all the castles go? This isn't a story of foreign invasion or natural disaster. It's the story of a nation deliberately dismantling its own past, a dramatic decision that reshaped the landscape of Japan forever. Welcome to the tale of the lost castles of Japan and the fateful Haijō Edict of 1873. To understand why a nation would tear down its own fortresses, we have to travel back to the mid-19th century. For over 200 years, Japan had been under the rule of the Tokugawa shogunate, a period of relative peace and strict isolation known as the Edo period. Society was rigid, with the samurai class at the top. Castles weren't just military strongholds. They were the administrative centers and symbols of power for the local lords, the daimyo. Each castle town was a world unto itself, revolving around its lord and his retainers. But this secluded world was about to be shattered. In 1853, American Commodore Matthew Perry sailed his black ships into Edo Bay, forcing Japan to open its ports to foreign trade. This event sent shockwaves through the nation, exposing the technological and military gap between Japan and the Western powers. The shogunate's inability to repel the foreigners was seen as a sign of weakness, sparking widespread unrest. The cry of "Sono Joy," revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, grew louder. This movement aimed to restore political power to the emperor and modernize the country to resist Western influence. After a brief but decisive civil war, the last shogun abdicated in 1868. The young Emperor Meiji was restored to power, marking the beginning of a revolutionary era, the Meiji Restoration. The new Meiji government had a monumental task ahead: to transform Japan from a feudal, agrarian society into a modern, industrialized nation-state capable of standing on equal footing with the West. Their slogan was Fukoku Kyohei: enrich the country, strengthen the army. This meant radical, top-to-bottom reform. One of the first and most significant changes was the dismantling of the old feudal system. The daimyo domains were abolished and replaced with modern prefectures, controlled by the central government in Tokyo. The samurai class, the very backbone of the old order, was stripped of its privileges. They lost their right to carry swords, and their traditional stipends were phased out. Suddenly, the warrior class that had defined Japan for centuries was obsolete. And with the lords and samurai gone, what was the purpose of their castles? In the eyes of the Meiji reformers, these fortresses were more than just empty buildings. They were powerful, physical reminders of the old, decentralized feudal system, a system they were determined to eradicate. The castles represented local loyalties and potential centers of rebellion against the new central authority. They were relics of a past that stood in the way of a unified, modern Japan. Furthermore, maintaining these massive structures was incredibly expensive. The new government was pouring every available resource into building railways, factories, and a modern conscript army. The upkeep of hundreds of aging wooden castles was a financial burden they simply couldn't afford. They needed the land for new military barracks, schools, and government offices. They needed the materials, the timber, stone, and roof tiles, for new construction. This brings us to the year 1873. The government issued the Castle Demolition Edict, or Haijō Rei. This fateful decree ordered the decommissioning of all castles except for those to be used by the new Imperial Japanese Army. The Ministry of Finance was put in charge of selling off the rest. Local governments were given the choice to either purchase their local castles or see them demolished. The results were devastating. Across the country, magnificent structures were sold for scrap. Some were bought by private individuals for astonishingly low prices. The iconic wooden keeps, towering gates, and intricate turrets were torn down. Their timbers were used for firewood, their foundation stones repurposed for new buildings, and their metal fittings melted down. It was a fire sale of national heritage. Think about it. A castle that took decades to build and stood for centuries could be dismantled in a matter of months. Local people, eager to embrace modernity and leave the feudal past behind, often participated in the demolition themselves. For many, the castles were symbols of oppressive feudal rule, and tearing them down was an act of liberation. Moats were filled in to create new land for development. Entire castle grounds were cleared. It was a systematic erasure of the physical symbols of the samurai age. From the thousands that once dotted the landscape, only about 200 were spared for military use. The rest were slated for destruction. But not everyone was eager to see these landmarks disappear. As the dust settled from the demolitions, a new sentiment began to emerge. Some people started to realize what was being lost. One of the key figures in this early preservation movement was a German doctor named Erwin von Beelz, who served the imperial court. He was horrified by the destruction and lobbied influential figures to protect the remaining structures. Another crucial voice was Colonel Nakamura Shigeto of the Imperial Army. He recognized the historical and cultural value of the castles and argued for their preservation. He famously pleaded for the protection of Himeji Castle, one of the most beautiful castles in Japan, which had been sold at auction for a mere 23 yen, a ridiculously small sum even at the time. The buyer intended to demolish it and develop the land, but the cost of demolition proved too high and the castle was thankfully spared. Thanks to the efforts of people like Beelz and Nakamura and a growing public awareness, the tide slowly began to turn. In the 1890s, the government began to pass laws to protect important historical sites. The frantic rush to modernize at all costs was tempered by a newfound appreciation for the nation's cultural heritage. Castles that had survived the initial wave of destruction, like Himeji, Matsumoto, and Hikone, were now seen as national treasures. So, what remains today? Of the nearly 5,000 castles, only 12 have their original main keeps, or tenshu, still intact from the Edo period or earlier. These are the original 12, and they are priceless windows into the past. Castles like Matsumoto in Nagano, with its striking black walls, or Inuyama in Aichi, the oldest of the 12, are living museums. Himeji Castle, the White Heron, is perhaps the most famous, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a masterpiece of Japanese castle architecture. But what about the hundreds of others? Many of the castles you can visit in Japan today are actually post-war reconstructions. Cities like Osaka, Nagoya, and Hiroshima rebuilt their castles as symbols of civic pride and post-war recovery. While these reconstructions are often built with modern materials like reinforced concrete, they serve an important purpose. They give us a tangible sense of the scale and grandeur of the original structures and have become beloved local landmarks in their own right. They are monuments not only to the samurai era, but also to the resilience of the Japanese people. However, for every reconstruction, there are hundreds of lost castles. Today, all that remains of them might be a few stone walls, a section of a moat, or a single rebuilt turret standing in a public park. These castle ruins, or yoseki, are scattered all over Japan. They are quiet, often poignant places where you can stand and imagine the towering structures that once dominated the skyline. They are a testament to what was sacrificed in the name of progress. The story of Japan's lost castles is a powerful lesson in the complexities of modernization. The Meiji reformers made a calculated and, in many ways, a necessary choice. To build a new nation, they felt they had to dismantle the old one, brick by brick. It was a painful but pivotal moment that propelled Japan onto the world stage. Yet, it also resulted in an immense cultural loss that can never be fully recovered. It's a classic conflict between heritage and progress, a dilemma that nations around the world continue to face. So, the next time you see a picture of a magnificent Japanese castle, remember that it's a survivor. It stands not just as a symbol of the samurai, but also as a symbol of what was saved from the brink of oblivion. It's a reminder that history is not just what we choose to remember, but also what we choose to preserve. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into Japan's past. It's a fascinating and complex story, and there's so much more to explore. What do you think? Was the destruction of the castles a necessary evil for modernization? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more deep dives into history and culture. We'll see you in the next one.